the Jimmy Butler kind of questions, everything that has come out over the course of the last week, rebuttals, let's go with as well. We're absolutely going to get into that because I find that pretty funny as well. We are going to dive in and talk through all of that. So, how did we get here to where last week you and I talked about, like, hey,
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler, like there is a real chance that his name comes up on the trade market. Wouldn't surprise me, but Miami in general tends to be a team that tries to win now. It would probably have to be like a pretty wild deal. They'd have to figure out something that makes sense across the board, and all of that feels very convoluted and complicated. So what does Shams Charania do on, what was this, Monday this week? He comes out and writes a thing saying Jimmy Butler is basically available, like in a trade, that the Miami Heat are willing to discuss this. Every trade deadline period, there are players who emerge as key figures to watch, and I'm quoting Shams now, those who could shift balance power in the NBA. This season, all eyes will be on Miami Heat six-time All-Star Jimmy Butler and New Orleans Pelicans one-time All-Star Brandon Ingram. Butler is one of the NBA's elite competitors and a perennial playoff performer, yada, yada, yada. But we eventually get here where the Heat are open to listening to offers for Butler and making a deal if the proposal is right. League sources told ESPN, and Butler's agent, Bernie Lee, has indicated in league circles that Butler is open to destinations such as two of the Texas teams, the Houston Rockets and Dallas Mavericks, and the Golden State Warriors. Butler is a native of Houston. Above all, though, he is prefer a win-now title contender in any trade. Teams have also been informed that Butler tends to opt out of his deal in the offseason and become a free agent. The Heat have hovered around the play-in tournament over the last two seasons, and with Butler's contractual status, they have been open-minded to trade inquiries. Okay. So then Shams follows up and says the Suns are also on Jimmy Butler's list. That leads to this. Bernie Lee, referenced in the Shams report, decides to tweet about Shams. And to be clear, this is not the first time Bernie Lee has done something like this. Bernie Lee has absolutely gone after Shams in the past. I think that like he basically called him like an ambulance chaser trying to get like MRIs previously in maybe 2021 that was. Bernie Lee. All right, listen, I gave you a pass yesterday because I was busy, but if you don't stop putting my name on your complete and utter made up bullshit because you know you normally aren't worth my time to acknowledge, continue. I don't know what I'm going to do because I'm a middle-aged dad, but just know it would indicate severe dislike. World, all this is fabricated. I have never, and honestly, it wouldn't help me or the position I represent to do anything that's been reported by this said, quote, journalist. Shams, this is your opportunity to say my bad. Quote, I let Chat GPT write my tweets and it went old school Peter Vecenie. In parentheses, Shams, Peter was a writer in the 90s. Be a trendsetter, invent the new, I was hacked, carry on. Thank you. So, okay, Bernie, I love it. I'm here for, look, here's the thing, like whether or not Shams is right, I'm not going to get into the journalism of what Shams did here. I will say that I respect Bernie just putting his name on it. Like, I respect that he's not trying to leak this through anybody. I respect that he's just like, fuck this. Like, I'm just coming out and saying this. Screw this dude. This is not right. None of this is right. This is all bullshit. And, you know, whether or not he's messaging or not, who knows? Who cares? Right? I just like he's putting his name on it. Shout out Bernie Lee.
Yeah, and he was kind of funny with it as well. Like, I appreciate the humor and some of the jokes that he went to, and but also the new, like he referenced Peter Vecenie and Chat GPT in the same tweet or in one, in back-to-back tweets, which I'm like, there's 30 years of difference in those references, which, if you're going to come back at somebody and put your name on it, at least be a little bit creative with it. So I kind of caught wind of it. Obviously people were retweeting and all of that. So I just kind of, I don't get into that stuff too much, but it was funny just to see him go back and kind of the way in which he did it.
Yeah. And look, here's the thing worth saying here. I'm not going to like back up Shams. I don't know what's going on here. Joms doesn't need my backup, right? What I will say is that Jimmy Butler and Bernie Lee have cultivated a situation by nature of, not having extended, or the Miami Heat have cultivated a situation by virtue of not having offered an extension, that this was always going to be a conversation at some point this year.
Yeah.
Now, the Heat might be listening to offers. It doesn't say that they're making calls out to teams, which makes a ton of sense to me, because why would they be making calls out to teams? You have Jimmy Butler, who's probably the best player on the trade market right now. You should be accepting the calls, right? But I don't know that it is all that surprising that they listen to calls. They're a team that is currently right around 500. That's where they project to be, right around 500. I know they've made some really cool playoff runs with Jimmy Butler, but this team doesn't look like a team that is poised to do that necessarily this year. They're in a Southeast division that Orlando looks to have pretty firmly under control, even with the Paulo and Franz injuries. Atlanta is rising right now. They've done a really good job of building around Trey. We'll talk about them when we get to the NBA Cup section here. It feels like they are in a more difficult spot than what they had been previously, when they were probably a little bit more willing to play the game of, okay, Jimmy's going to miss 25 games this year. We just need him to be healthy for the playoffs. As long as we get into the playoffs, we can be the 8 seed and we feel good about where we're going. Right now they're in a deeper, I don't want to say deep Eastern Conference, but deeper than what it was, a deeper division, and it's a little bit trickier for them. So of course they're listening.
And very top heavy, especially with the Boston Celtics, right? Like, what team
Absolutely
thinks
true.
that they can make a run to the Eastern Conference Finals of the NBA championship with this Boston Celtics team as the potential 1 seed, with no disrespect to also a very good Cleveland Cavalier team? And to your point, you have the Orlando Magic, you have the New York Knicks, sorry, GMAC, but still, and the Milwaukee Bucks are essentially have the same record as them. Like, it's right there and have been descending, not to mention the Atlanta Hawks that you already referenced. But I think your first point is the one that is most important. We were talking about a potential, what are they going to do with Jimmy Butler? Going back to the offseason, Sam, you put it on the outline 6 months ago. We just talked about it last week. When I saw these tweets about, Jimmy Butler may be on the trade market, I didn't bat an eye. It wasn't like, Kevin Durant may be on the trade market, or whoever, some random, not random, but, player that we're not expecting. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I just said that the Heat should be out of the Jimmy Butler business and be moving on. Not because I think Jimmy's not good, but because Jimmy Butler's 35, you're not going to compete for a championship with this roster, and he has a player option next year. So, What can you go get for him? Now, that's the tricky part. I'm sure we'll talk about it. Who can bring him in, and what can they send out if they don't go get? That's the Suns thing. They're going to trade Bradley Beal? Is that the deal? Plus what?
Okay, so before we get into specifics,
okay, yeah, my bad. I got ahead of myself.
There's one point I want to bring up. No, we're really close to that. You were right to do that, but there's one point I want to bring up here that is really important in the Shams report. According to Shams, Butler has informed teams, or teams have been informed by somebody, that Butler intends to opt out of his deal in the offseason and become a free agent.
Yep.
So that makes him an expiring deal where you only have him for 6 months now, if you best case scenario happens, right? And you go deep in the playoffs. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think Jimmy Butler is going to have 50 million there on the market.
I would agree.
So whether or not that is just posturing, whether or not that is, Butler thinking, okay, but I might have 160 on the market or something, which I don't know if he'll have that either. Sure. Okay. But the bigger issue for Miami here is that drastically reduces his trade value.
Yeah.
By saying that, or informing teams of that, somebody informing teams of that. That makes it harder to actually constitute a trade for Jimmy Butler if he's not going to opt into that deal. So that's kind of actually the biggest thing I'm watching for here is depending on who the team is, does that attitude change? Does it become something different? Does it become a situation where Jimmy Butler is willing to opt in at the time of the trade? That's the key, because you have to know that you'd be getting him for 2 years at that point. So that's an important factor here as we go through and talk about teams. Shams mentioned 4 teams, so let's talk about those 4 teams maybe at the start here. Phoenix is actually kind of the easiest to talk about, unless they're going to move Kevin Durant or Devin Booker, which seems highly unlikely at this point. It basically has to be this structure. It has to be Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler and a minimum contract.
Yeah.
That's the only way that you can do it. And how does that satisfy trade restrictions? Phoenix cannot aggregate anybody with Bradley Beal. Like, they can't move Bradley Beal and somebody else. Now, as I talk around the league to executives and people like that, they have some questions on, will the NBA allow you to basically do 2 simultaneous moves, one after the other, where, like, would the league allow them to do Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler in a minimum, like Josh Richardson or something, and then also do like Ryan Dunn for a minimum deal or something like that, right? I've heard mixed, like, this hasn't been pressure tested yet, basically. Now,
so hold on with that. Some people think that the NBA would not allow that to happen.
Yeah, because it would be circumvention of the trade rules, basically.
Which is interesting, though, because before this CBA, if I'm not mistaken, having listened to our good friend Keith Smith, this stuff happens all the time, that when a trade goes through, a team can make it, officially it can go through however, if they want it to be
as multiple separate trades,
as multiple separate trades and stuff like that, if it best benefits. Like, each team can do it differently if they want, however it best suits them. So, but this is interesting
under this circumstance.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
You would be actually trying to circumvent the rules a bit by involving like a second team.
I had not thought
or like
of
a
that.
second deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you made me like guess on how this looks, I would say they probably would let it go, but I don't know that. Like, that's just me. And frankly, like, I think everybody that does this, like, maybe Keith has talked to the league on this too. Like, certainly I love Keith. Everybody knows Keith is on the show regularly. I truly adore him, but like, I don't know if we know yet. Like, I don't know if Keith could know that yet. I don't know if anybody knows that yet, just because we haven't gotten a chance to stress test it at this point. Right. And just looking at this thing, by the way, like, if it was Ryan Dunn that the Miami Heat specifically wanted, right? Ryan Dunn is making $2.5 million. You could do, I guess Alec Burks or something there for Ryan Dunn in theory, right?
And the reason you have to do this is, right now in the trade, you're saying not only would the Heat send out Butler plus whoever, but they would take back Bradley Beal on a longer deal and a not as good player, and the Suns don't really have any draft capital to add to that trade. So
and I'm also kind of realizing that the other piece of this that's complicated is that the Heat also have a restriction where I think that they can't take back $1 more than what Butler makes. And the only reason that like Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson or some minimum salary works is because there's the minimum salary rule where you can trade a minimum basically freely within this thing. So Phoenix is an incredibly complicated destination. I don't see Phoenix happening personally, because the other important piece of this with Bradley Beal as well is Bradley Beal has a no trade clause. And while there has been a willingness from Beal theoretically to do a move to Miami or something, he would still have to agree to it, right? And if you're Bradley Beal, you're competing for a title right now, and you chose Phoenix previously, are you really going to go agree to a trade to a team that has less of a chance to win a title? I don't know. I don't know if he would be. So I think Phoenix is way too complicated. And I don't look Andy Ellisberg. The other piece of this with Miami, Andy Ellisberg is like a cap genius. If you were asking people around the league who the best salary cap executives are, at the very least, Andy Ellisberg's name for the Miami Heat would come up within the top 3 or 4 names, right? He's exceptionally well respected and well regarded in this respect. So if there's a deal out there to be made, he will figure it out. But I think Miami structurally is a bit too complicated to work. Let's get to a quick little note from Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money action. There are over 10 million members. Like I said a second ago, they invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Prize Picks always puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. We are big fans of Prize Picks here. We absolutely love the app and what they're doing for the daily fantasy sports scene. Download the app today and use code Game Theory to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use that code Game Theory to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn a very liberal 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of the high net worth for any net worth for just $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For specific product disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Now, do you want to do the Texas teams? Do you want to do Golden State next?
Let's do Gold. Let's do Golden State and then go to Texas.
Okay. So Golden State would basically have to involve Andrew Wiggins. There's not really a way around that.
Yep.
I would venture that for salary cap reasons, DeAnthony Melton would have to be involved just because DeAnthony Melton makes 12.8 million.
Yep. You're at 40 between those two.
39.
39. Excuse me.
Yeah.
39.
And Jimmy makes 48.
Yep.
Let's assume here that Kuminga would be involved.
Yep.
Right? Because that makes sense. Like if you're Miami, you clearly want something for Jimmy Butler, right? If you're getting Jimmy Butler, Jonathan Kuminga probably moves to the bench. He's probably not going to be super pleased about that necessarily. So in a contract year, at least, that gets you to like 46, I think, somewhere in that ballpark. And because the Warriors are hard capped at the first apron, that still is actually not enough money to do this deal. You would have to like somehow involve a third team involving Kevon Looney, involving Gary Payton, some
Kyle
of these guys
Anderson.
that are on Kyle Anderson, one of these guys that's on like a slightly bigger deal, basically. And someone would have to agree to take him into like their mid-level exception if they have that available, into a trade exception, something like that.
Pistons have cap space, I assume, for this very reason, to be the third team in a situation like this.
Sure. Having cap space is another avenue. That's a really good point that I didn't mention. Do you think, if you're Miami, that Jonathan Kuminga is worth trading Jimmy Butler for? Is kind of what that comes down to me. I'm sure they would ask for a first round pick as well, but is like Kuminga and a first round pick, and then you have the Wiggins deal. You have, to give Jonathan Kuminga a lot of money in the summer in all likelihood.
So
does that work for you?
So that my initial reaction was yes, if with the first round pick, because I also think Andrew Wiggins has had a really nice season, kind of a bounce back year, and has played very well. Kuminga would be interesting. I'd have to think a little bit more about like his fit within that roster and all of that. But I know I'm a bigger Kuminga fan than you are, and maybe people in general. I know he doesn't fit with that Warriors team. My biggest hesitation with that would be the contract that he's going to want. And do I want to immediately then give him that money this offseason? Like if I had a better understanding of what his side was wanting in a deal, that would make me feel a little bit better about this, along with knowing like, is Jimmy Butler truly willing to test free agency this offseason and leave Miami, for nothing? Am I going to get nothing for him? Probably not going to happen, because even if he does opt out, it probably ends up being a sign-in trade of some sort. But in general, I think a player like Kuminga plus a pick and a nice another piece like Wiggins, but that's a lot of money still on my books. That's going to be long-term money that makes me pause a little bit.
Yeah. So the other deal that I kind of played around with a little bit, if you wanted to do a 2-team deal, was like Wiggins, Melton, Payton, and Kuminga to Miami, and then Miami sends back Butler, Highsmith, and Burks. That gets you right within the ballpark as well financially. Financially, it works like deal wise. But if you're Miami, you probably don't want to give up Highsmith, who has been really good and really
Very
valuable
for
them this year.
Yeah.
So this is why this deal is tricky, right? And now we get to the two.
Hold on, can I ask you a real quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
What is your thoughts about Butler on the Warriors? Like we just, in the deal we just talked about that, we traded away Andrew Wiggins, who again is having a very nice bounce back year, a Jonathan Kuminga who's had really nice moments. Melton unfortunately is injured, but like you get rid of kind of all that depth. Like maybe the second star is worth it, but how do you like that fit and how that good that team would be?
Yeah, I think it works pretty well, in all honesty. I think Jimmy's a really good fit with that scheme. I think he's a really good fit next to Stephen Curry. Really good defender still when he's locked in, and like I think it gives them a drastically higher ceiling in the playoffs, I think is what I would say. They're probably a slightly worse regular season team because they are losing quite a bit of depth, but I think it gives them a much better ceiling in the playoffs.
I think I agree. And based on Steph Curry's age and Draymond's age, that probably makes it worth it for me if I'm the Warriors. Like I think you probably have to do that.
It would depend on the price point for me, because there's real opportunity cost here. Like you could go out and try and get somebody else, right? You could go out and try and get multiple other role players, right? There are different avenues that you can do. This one would be your swing if you did Jimmy Butler. But yeah, no, it's just way too difficult. And, the awesome thing to do would be to do it and keep Wiggins. That's just like,
can't get to the money.
I'm fairly certain they can't get to the money and do that, really. Okay. The other thing that I will mention about the Warriors is all of these constructions outside of the one that I mentioned, which gets very complicated, Wiggins, Melton, Payton, Kuminga for Butler, Highsmith, Burks, and I'm not convinced that the Heat would be excited about that, and they would probably involve multiple picks at that point. It is, if you talk to teams around the league, if you talk to high-level executives around the league, it is exceptionally fucking difficult to do like 3-for-1, 4-for-1 deals in season.
Yeah.
That is more of an off-season deal.
Yeah.
Because you're basically trading a fifth of your team to do this.
Yep.
Now, the next two teams that we want to talk about here, Dallas and Houston. Houston can just do this easily. Like they can get to the money. Like they have all this expiring money. It's just whether or not it works, right? Dallas is
How do they get there? Like, I'm looking at that, like,
the reason I brought up the like 4-for-1, 5-for-1, 3-for-1 kind of thing is that that's what it would have to be for Dallas. It would have to be like Gafford, Kleba. I think they would have to throw in PJ Washington.
I don't know that they can get there if you don't have one of PJ or Clay.
Yeah, like could be Clay, I guess. Like that, maybe. But if you're Miami, why do you want Clay?
You almost have to do PJ, Gafford, Kleba, and Najee Marshall. And at that point, you just completely depleted any depth you have.
Right. So I don't
see it.
I don't see that one really either. Houston can do this. And the question is like, should Houston do this? Right. And Houston can do it by, I mean, they have so many of these expiring guys kind of near the end of the bench where.
But does it have to start with Dylan Brooks?
It's a good question. 16, I would think you could do like
27.
Adams, Jeff Green, Jock Londale, Jayshawn Tate would get you pretty close, wouldn't it?
That's 28, 35. Even if you added Holiday, you're only at 40. I think Dylan Brooks has to. I think if you add Brooks, then you can use whatever combination. But without Dylan Brooks, I don't think that this. I think it's hard to get there.
It's a fair point. You probably do have to throw in Brooks, I guess, at that point. And like the other thing is like, what does Miami get here, right? So is it that they're getting Cam Whitmore? Is it that they're getting, they're definitely not doing Reed Shepherd for Jimmy Butler.
I was gonna say none of the other guys. Like they're not moving Tari. They're not moving him in. They're not moving Reed.
I don't think they're moving Jabari for him. Yeah. Like, so what does Miami get? They probably just get like picks back, basically, right?
Yeah.
So
and Houston has some really fun ones. So
yeah, so like you take out Jayshawn Tate, you throw in Dylan Brooks in terms of what I said, like that gets you basically on the money, I think, in terms of where they could go. No, you'd have to reduce a bit there. It gets a little bit complicated.
I think if you took out like Landell or Green and put Tate in, I think maybe that $500,000 gets you closer.
It's Brooks, Adams, and Green is how you get there. Just simple. Brooks, Adams, Green. And that's a deal that is doable at that point. I mean, Jimmy Butler makes Houston better.
Yeah.
And they have the depth to where they can actually overcome a 3-for-1 deal.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. Like if you do Brooks, to me, then it would come down to how many picks are you wanting to give up? And are you keeping enough in the chest that you can still make another move if this one doesn't work or down the road? And because you are in a weird situation then where you have 35-year-old Jimmy Butler and 30-year-old Fred VanVleet, and then all of these young guys. I don't hate it though, because this team is proven to be ready to win right now, as we're going to talk about here in a little bit as well. So I don't hate the idea. I just wouldn't want to see them give up a ton of that draft capital in that move. And that's obviously what Miami would want, because they're not getting any player capital unless Cam Whitmore is included. I don't think they're just, they're going to want more than just Cam Whitmore in this deal, obviously.
So, and here's the last team that I'll bring up. And this is actually the one that like, I think makes the most sense, if I'm being completely honest.
Okay.
Memphis has been looking for its big wing for a while.
Okay.
And I know that Memphis is not on Jimmy Butler's list. But Memphis has all of its picks. They have all of these interesting young guys. They have the Marcus Smart contract. You can throw in Brandon Clark and you can throw in Luke Kennard and get to the money, basically. Like, why doesn't that track? Like that's the one that makes the most sense to me.
No, I think that's a really interesting name. I hadn't thought of that one. We've been talking about this for a long time in terms of them due for a consolidation trade. Jimmy and who he is as a player would seem to really fit them and their identity and their style. And a Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jimmy Butler, Jaren Jackson Jr. would be super intriguing. I know Brandon Clark has been starting for them, but you still have Zach Edey. You have all of these wings. Gigi's going to be back eventually. Jay Huff, like are you that upset that, of all the teams to lose multiple rotation players, like as much love as I gave the Warriors for having depth, the Grizzlies are the ultimate team. And so
yes,
I think this is an interesting idea. This makes them a real contender.
I agree. Smart, Clark, Kennard plus a pick or two for Butler is very easy and simple and kind of makes the most sense to me. That also gives Memphis Edey, Santi, Laravia, Vince Williams, Jay Huff, Scottie Pippen, Jalen Wells, Gigi Jackson. Like still, maybe you do have to move like a Jalen Wells or something.
I say there's probably an argument for more player talent and less pick equity, right?
Yeah,
because you're going to start Morant, Bane, Butler, Jackson,
maybe Gigi Jackson maybe that's the carrot. It's Jackson and a pick or something, right?
Yeah. Because you have that starting lineup, plus you still have, like you said, Santi, Jake, Laravia, Jay Huff, Scottie Pippen. Well, you still have plenty of rotation players. I think they can afford to give. I think you probably want to give up the player talent and keep the draft equity to replenish down the road or whatever. That's an interesting conversation. I like this idea, actually, Sam. I do. I think this is a team that could make a lot of sense. I think this instantly makes them number 2 in the West. Just catapult them.
They're up there. I know that. Look, like they would have shooting questions, obviously, but the way that this offense is structured, it's kind of structured to work.
Yeah, they play fast enough, right? The way they move and the spacing and the cutting, and maybe I'm overcompensating for that, but I think they'd be okay. I think they'd figure it out.
Yeah, this is the one that makes the most sense to me, which is, annoying that this isn't one of the 4 teams that Jimmy's excited about going to. And here's the other thing too. Again, for Miami to actually get what it wants in a Jimmy Butler deal, I feel like he's going to have to opt in to that player option and give a team a second year, or there's going to have to be like an under the table dealing where he does like a 3-year, $120 million extension where it's not immediate, but they have it like signed in a desk somewhere and it's done. Right.
Do those things happen?
Do those things happen? Do they happen in the NBA?
I don't know.
But yeah, so I hope that kind of outlays for people where this sits with Jimmy Butler. I think that Memphis makes by far the most sense if I'm looking around the league.
Yeah.
Of the 4 teams that, Shams outlined, I would say Houston makes the most sense because structurally it's kind of the easiest, either them or Golden State.
Yeah.
Golden State gets complicated because it has to be like a 3 or 4 for 1 with guys that are like actually playing in their team right now. Whereas Houston, it's 3 for 1 with really only one guy that's like playing real minutes and that they don't have like a ready-made replacement for. So yeah, that's kind of where I sit on this, I think. And that's where we can leave it. Memphis makes by far the most sense to me. But Golden State and Houston, like you can at least make that work. And I'm just going to be real with it. I don't actually think this is something Houston would do.
Yeah. I don't
think they would. I don't think they would blow up what they have going right now, like with their team, to bring in Jimmy Butler. Like they're happy with what they have right now.
Yeah, you sold me on Memphis in the moment here. Maybe I'll look back and change my mind. So I would have Memphis as well. I would have Golden State too because of kind of what you said there with Houston, even though they're easy. And then, it was just almost impossible to figure something out for Dallas. And I just don't think the Phoenix one makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.